There's only been a small handful of people that have officially announced their candidacy for the presidency in 2020, but thankfully, it's already shaping up to be a pretty solid field. And, this is only the beginning. So I do want to talk about someone who has already announced. His name is Andrew Yang, and he comes from the business world, which isn't necessarily a good thing in my opinion. But he does have a solidly progressive platform, which includes campaign finance reform and the elimination of super PACs, legalizing marijuana, Medicare for all, statehood for Puerto Rico, net neutrality, increasing workers' rights, paid sick leave, allowing post offices to provide banking services to Americans, and those are just some of many policy proposals that he has listed on his website. However, he doesn't seem to support tuition-free public college. He also doesn't say anything about student loan debt cancellation, and also he plans to curtail what's known as the revolving door in Washington, D.C., where people leave federal office and then they'll go give speeches like Obama did to Wall Street and make millions of dollars, or they'll just go and work for the industry that they were once overseeing. So his goal is to put a lifetime ban on those types of Wall Street speeches, but at the same time, he is pledging to give federal lawmakers a raise as a result in order to dissuade them from trying to go to the private sector and basically work for the industry that they once regulated, which is a form of corruption. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm glad that he acknowledges the problem that is the revolving door in Washington, D.C., but the solution itself, that doesn't really resonate with me. However, by and large, to be fair to him, he has a really solidly progressive platform. And if he were to back student loan debt cancellation and free 4-year public college, he would be a virtually perfect candidate. But those are all of the issues that he's not as well known for, because the issue he's essentially running on is universal basic income. And this is both a campaign ad as well as his plea for UBI and why it's important.
We are experiencing the greatest technological and economic shift in human history. We need a way to help millions of Americans transition through this period, and a universal basic income is the best and most efficient way to do that. Hello, I'm Andrew Yang, and I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020. I believe I have the right vision, priorities, and values to improve the lives of millions of Americans. 7 years ago, I started Venture for America to train hundreds of young entrepreneurs to build businesses in Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, and other communities across the country. Together, we helped create thousands of jobs. But during this time, I came to realize that technology has already wiped out 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other states. And it's about to do the same thing to people who work in retail, food service and food prep, customer service, transportation, as well as industries like insurance, accounting, medicine, and law. I saw so much over the last number of years traveling this country. What I experienced was an eye-opener to me, where I would walk through abandoned neighborhoods and boarded up businesses. I have 2 young boys, and I'm deeply concerned about the future that they're going to grow up in. If we don't change things dramatically, they're going to grow up in a country with fewer and fewer opportunities, and a handful of companies and individuals reaping the gains from new technologies, while the rest of us struggle to find opportunities and eventually lose our jobs. And it doesn't need to be that way. Under my plan, every American adult will receive $1,000 a month, free and clear, paid for by a new tax on the companies that are benefiting most from automation. If we provide a universal basic income, Americans will be able to go back to school, move for a new opportunity, start their own business, and really have their head up as they plan for the future. With your help, we can make universal basic income a reality. Join us, and let's build a new kind of economy, one that puts people first.
I love it. Not only is it bold, but it's common sense. When you look at the trajectory for American jobs, automation is going to displace millions of American workers, and I don't know that anyone has proposed a feasible solution to deal with this. So I love that he's really making this the centerpiece of his campaign. I've said before that, if I were running, I would run on issues like Medicare for All and really put that front and center. And he's choosing to put UBI front and center, which I think is actually really smart. And even if his candidacy is a long shot, odds are he won't win because he just doesn't have the name recognition to be realistic here. The thing is that Andrew Yang just being on a debate stage, if he's allowed on the debate stages, that will influence the discussion in 2020 in a really positive way. And he's the only candidate proposing UBI to this extent. However, there is another candidate that is flirting with the idea of UBI and even proposed what I would call UBI light. And that person might actually surprise you because it's not Bernie Sanders. Can you guess who it is? If you had to think, who else in the 2020 field would possibly propose UBI? I don't think it's who you think it's going to be. It's Kamala Harris. So she's proposing a tax plan called the Lift the Middle Class Act that can be, I think, described as UBI light. And as Jordan Weissman of Slate explains, it would essentially send up to $500 each month to working families. It's not universal basic income, but it's as close as we've seen to one from a serious 2020 prospect. So credit to Kamala Harris here because this is actually a pretty solid tax plan. But just looking at it, there are two glaring issues with it, especially when juxtaposed with Andrew Yang's plan. First of all is if you start negotiations at a universal basic income or, a tax credit for Americans at $500 a month, you're going to end negotiations and actually get legislation that looks more like $250 or $200 per month. So I don't think that it behooves Kamala Harris to start at $500 if she actually wants $500 to be what Americans get each month. Another issue is that by means testing this, by saying this is a tax just for the middle class, well, that allows the right to deem this as a welfare program, which means that it's not going to get the public support that other social safety net programs have, like Social Security, for example. And even if the right would be unfair in characterizing this as welfare, since this is technically a tax credit, that that's exactly what they're going to do. However, with Andrew Yang's plan, if my understanding is correct, he wouldn't means test it. It would be offered to all Americans, and even though that doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea at face value, it does make it less vulnerable to attacks from the right and also would likely boost public support for it since higher income individuals who also receive it couldn't deem everyone else who also receives the same $1,000 payment from the government every month as moochers, since they're also benefiting from it. So Andrew Yang's UBI plan is really, really solid, but to be fair to Kamala Harris, this is still a huge step in the right direction. Now, I will say this, Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, he made the point a couple of weeks ago that if you're going to push for something like UBI, you need to make sure that you nail the framing down. And the reason why we're starting to win when it comes to Medicare for All is because we're not describing it as single payer. We're describing it as Medicare for All. We're just taking what exists, a policy that people are already familiar with, and we're improving it and we're also expanding it. So if you describe universal basic income as Social Security for all, as Kyle Kulinski says, that would make the world of difference because people already are familiar with Social Security. They know what it means. They know what the program entails. So if you describe it as that and you frame it along those lines, I think that this really could catch on and influence other 2020 presidential candidates to pick this up as well, because it's not new, it's not unfamiliar, it's not scary, because we all know what Social Security is. We all love Social Security. It's pulled how many elders out of poverty since its inception? I mean, it's crucial. So if you frame it as something like that, as, in the way that Social Security saved elders from poverty, it can save workers who fall victim to automation from poverty, I think that you really could have a chance of having something like this gain steam. And I'm glad that there's a candidate like Andrew Yang because, he's a solid candidate. And he really could influence American discourse when it comes to this issue and bring the issue of universal basic income to a national stage. That is, if he's able to participate in debates. Now, I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, because I'm sure, given that there's going to be like 80 candidates running at this point, and I'm exaggerating on purpose, but there's going to be a lot of candidates, right? So I'm sure that there's going to be some type of stipulation that if you are going to be able to participate in a debate, eligibility is going to start at 5% polling, for example. So I'm not sure that he's even going to have the opportunity to be on the debate stage, but nonetheless, his presence is great. It's much appreciated by someone like me who's a progressive. Now, do I prefer him to Bernie Sanders? No, because I still think that Bernie Sanders, one, he has the advantage because he has more name recognition, but I do think that just personally, because I'm a self-interested voter, Bernie Sanders' plan of free college, that's just more appealing to me than something like universal basic income in the short term, because I think that there are so many millennials who are in debt because of student loans that's hurting the aggregate economy, and we've got to do something about that. Now, am I also pushing Bernie to adopt something like student loan debt cancellation? Absolutely. I talked to Levy Sanders about this, Bernie's son, and, in his race in New Hampshire, he seemed open to it, and I think that Bernie Sanders would be open to that, as well as something like UBI. It just depends. But look, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown of Andrew Yang. He's certainly, a fascinating person, and I'm looking forward to his presence in the field, because he's bringing a lot to the table, and I respect him for just being so bold and unapologetic on this one issue that really is important.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.